Welcome, everybody. It is Business Monday, the 4 o'clock hour. We are here with Cha-ching, Money in the Bank, Gary Sass, the Money Man. Welcome. Good to see you today.
Always good to see you.
Especially good to be seen today. A little sad news. Somebody that I worked with for a number of years as a partner with over at RDW. You know, you had a probably longer relationship with him. Mike Doyle, one of the founding partners at RDW Group, passed away this weekend after a long battle with some illness. And, you know, is one of those guys who kind of made Rhode Island go. The airport expansion, Providence Place Mall. He was kind of that guy you went to see to make big projects go. Built a wildly successful firm. Rich legacy working for Dupree and Claudine Schneider. What's your recollection on Mike?
Oh, I first met Mike when he was chief of staff to Governor Dupree. And he was serious, hardworking, and also a lot of fun. You know, half the time we were agreeing, other half the time we were fighting, but it was never personal. I remember one story when I was at RIPEC, when Dupree was governor the first term. We did our usual analysis of the budget, and I sent Mike and the governor, a copy the day or so before we released it. And Mike called up, "I want to come see you right now." I went to see him, and he was red-faced. I thought the heart attack was going to happen then. And there was some section of the analysis which was generally pretty neutral. It wasn't favorable to Dupree, it wasn't negative. But there was one section that they interpreted as being negative. And we had an argument for about 15, 20 minutes. I thought he'd pass out, but he was very intense. He was, focused. He was always a gentleman, always, honest in, what he did. Had a good strategic sense. He gave people a lot of advice on how to promote projects they were interested in. It was generally good advice. So, he will be missed.
Yeah, I knew him from being partners with him. We went through tremendous growth. In 3 years, we went from 20 people to 120 people, and Mike was a very, very good business person. He really understood how to build a business. He understood how to create value in a company. He knew how to make it get profitable. Wildly aggressive, but also let people do what they needed to do to be successful. He'll be missed. I think the wake is on Wednesday, and the funeral's on Thursday. I'm sure there will be a very significant turnout to that, but to Mike Doyle, rest in peace. The other big news, which was big news, we don't have a lot of publicly traded companies here in Rhode Island on the big boards. Twin River is announced that it is taking over, merging with, but it's functionally a takeover of a significant Delaware gaming company, and headquarters is going to be here in Rhode Island. The company's going public. They're going to be either on the New York Stock Exchange or the NASDAQ, according to the release that came out late yesterday. It's pretty big news here in Rhode Island.
Yeah, and it's very good. When I was director of revenue, I was responsible for working on the phase-out, the workout of the bankruptcy of the previous owners, and got a chance to work with John Taylor and his group. And it was a very easy process. Twin River and John have been great corporate citizens, worked very well with the public sector, with the legislature, with the governor, have done what they said they were going to do. Actually, they're our partner. They're taxpayers' partner because the lottery revenues, which include the video lottery terminals, which are run at Twin River and at Newport and then soon at Tiverton, are going to generate, with sports betting next year, probably about $325 million. It's the third largest individual source of state revenue. Business taxes as a group, but not as an individual tax, produce more. So the well-being of that corporation, is important to the state for a number of reasons. Not only jobs, not only private sector development, but also we have to protect our third major revenue source. The fact that they have bought the Delaware Corporation, I think it will help them by bringing additional talent to bear. It's always good to have interstate corporations housed in your state.
It's always good to be the winner, not the loser in these things, right?
Right.
The
And
last
so,
thing you want to do is have the jobs going down to Delaware.
yeah, no, so they have, since the rocky start with the original, Twin River, it's really become a success story. Tiverton is going to be a success story as well. And hope for the best, but it certainly is a good sign for the state.
Certainly a lot of changes coming in gaming. You've got sports betting coming on as early as October. Tiverton is now scheduled, got the date got moved up to September. This merger's got to get obviously finalized, but it seems to be very far along. No timeline on when the company is going public, and no announcement yet on what the implications are for employment. Hopefully, obviously, all the Rhode Island jobs we want to see held in place, but hopefully they'll be moving some jobs from Delaware potentially up here, or just that the bigger entity will be able to grow and be a bigger player nationally. So it's certainly another element of the business sector to keep an eye on. Good news that it wasn't going the other way, that Dover was not the bigger of the two entities and taking over. Rhode Island, I don't think, could absorb that right now, despite some of the claims about what the job situation is. Is it, we're not in the biggest merger and acquisition period of time in business history. It is a busy time in M&A. We saw CVS make a major acquisition. There's certainly rumors about Hasbro and Mattel that have been kicking around for the past year. Do you see that sphere, that part of that Wall Street merger and acquisition having any other impact in Rhode Island?
Well, I don't know of any impact, but I think there's been a sea change. I can remember when Mattel was rumored to buy Hasbro, and legislation had to be passed to,
in a day.
Yeah, to make a poison pill, so that couldn't happen. And now you see Rhode Island corporations, whether it's CVS, whether it's Hasbro, whether it's the Twin River, company, being in a position to buy other companies. So that, I think, if you look at it over a long period, a long arc of time, that seems to be an improvement. The one area, where we lost, and you can see it every day, is in financial services and financial business.
Yep.
You count the the assets of Rhode Island held banks right now, and there's some good businesses, but it's not a big number compared to some of the others. So, but I see a positive trend as far as M&A is concerned. We're not always the hunted anymore. We're doing some hunting.
Yeah, that's right. So that's some good news. I know we didn't preview it, but the Fane Tower proposal took maybe a bump or a hit last week, where the Ordinance Committee voted to recommend to the full council a negative position on the request for the zoning change and the variance on the height. As long as I've been around, the hope and the prayer was that someday we'll have a business environment in which somebody from out of town would want to come to Providence and invest hundreds of millions of dollars without a million incentives to build something. We've finally hit that stage, and opponents certainly are throwing some tax on the road. Predictions are that the vote on the full council may be more positive, or is undecided right now, but very close. Is that, if this guy comes into town, it's been well publicized both here and across New England, is that an indication that we're not the best place to come and do business?
No, it depends, because I don't think we're that much different from other people. Certainly, no one wants to look at $250 million investment in the eye and say that's not a good idea. At the same time, there's a balance. You want to protect the integrity of your community, the quality of life in your community. People have different views what that means. I think the most serious reservations about the Fane Tower with the zoning issue and spot zoning. And as a practice, I don't think anyone thinks spot zoning is a good idea. Certainly, some of your listeners and yourself, if somebody came in your neighborhood and wanted to spot zone a McDonald's, I think the neighbors would be a little bit concerned about it. So, you have to be concerned about the impact of spot zoning, because you could be next. There are important principles there.
Yeah.
So, the legitimate question. Having said that, another complicating factor, politically complicating factor, is I-195. I-195 was sold as it was going to be, the center of innovation and technology, the renaissance for Rhode Island, and a lot of the development, down there has not necessarily, been innovation and technology. In this case, it's building apartments. Hopefully, that would be a stimulus for people to come and either build jobs here or commute to Boston. But it's part of that whole consequence. The city of Providence, I think, got a bad deal, and I-95, the way it was done, was pushed down their throat. I think certain prerogatives of municipal government were kind of handled in a very cavalier way by development people in the state. And so when something like this comes up, when there's spot zoning, when there's a controversial design plan, and you put it into the broader environment of how we got to this point, how the decision was made, not to justify or take a position one way or another of whether the council or the ordinance committee is making a right decision, that is the cards that we dealt ourselves. And as a resident and as a politician in the city of Providence, I have memory. Mm-hmm. And I remember when I gave up certain prerogatives of my city, and then you want to come back in and spot zone, maybe a very worthwhile project to spot zone, there's still that history. And it shouldn't be forgotten lightly.
But we make zoning changes all the time. I mean, spot zoning seems to be the extreme. It's an expansion of the height. That's the major
now, I
change
understand they would knock the height down 100 feet. Have you heard that? I don't know if that's accurate or not.
Yeah, I mean, listen, it's hard to negotiate when both the mayor and the president of the city council have yet to voice a clear viewpoint on this thing and have taken no leadership position.
And where's the governor stand on this thing?
Governor's been in favor of this. Senate President's been in favor of it. The Speaker of the House has been very quiet on it, but it did pass the enabling legislation to make it happen. Supposedly, according to counts, the council's probably, one vote one way or the other. But, very different time than Providence Place Mall, which required a gazillion changes. I mean, if you want to talk about spot zoning, it wasn't only spot zoning. We built a new highway for them. We did this. We moved, railroad tracks. We sold them federal land. We bought federal land. We stood on our heads and spun around like a top.
But I look at but the infrastructure issue was different, because before we had the Providence Mall, we had an eyesore of the old Chinese wall with the railroad tracks. Downtown was cut in half. What most of Providence Mall was, if my memory is correct, was a parking lot with concrete that wasn't in very good shape.
Was the URI campus? It was the yellow normal building.
The abnormal building.
Yeah.
And
I took some summer classes. Don't besmirch that building.
Was it URI?
It was URI.
URI.
Yeah, it was URI's.
But everyone recognized that public facility was not in good shape.
Yep.
As a matter of fact, it was in terrible shape. It was a terrible learning facility. So I don't know if you can equate them. But I'm asking this question. Now, if the council decides they disagree with the ordinance committee, do they have to refer this back to the ordinance committee?
Yeah, unclear. There's a couple stream of thoughts. I think they can reject it. They would have to take it up separately. There would be a number of steps, but regardless, it's not over yet, and the path is not completely clear. And
now, the council won't be meeting until September, is that correct?
Special committee meetings probably likely. I think they have to take up the school budget anyways by a special council meeting. I think that's actually, one of them's tonight. There may be others. We'll see. But clearly not a lot of, in the case of Providence Place Mall, the project changed quite a bit. But for the most part, mayors and governors led, had meaningful discussions, had people in, made changes, got concessions, negotiated, and there's not a lot of that going on right now.
And there are a couple of different leadership issues.
You started with Sunland, then it went to Almond.
And Almond played a key role in that. Because
Absolutely.
you remember Almond's campaign. When he ran the campaign.
Will never be built.
Yeah, well, I was going to be more genteel and say he suggested reservations about it.
No, he said it will never be built. Yes.
Okay. And then, and I think Buddy was mayor at the time.
Buddy was mayor both under Sunland and under Almond, and you know, whatever you want to say about Buddy Cianci, he knew how to run to the front of a parade of a big construction project as good as anybody.
But he was a strong advocate for the city.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you're right. How can you expect the council to take a firm position, you know, if you don't know where the mayor stands on this?
Or the council president. I mean, both of them have been mute on the issue, literally. Yeah, it's a strange time here in Providence, but we do have motorized scooters zipping around without any permit or anything else.
Is that safe?
The mayor of Boston says they are not, and says if they show up in Boston, he's going to take them to the tow yard.
How'd they get here so quickly?
They just popped up on Monday. The scooter industry, which is zooming by right now, is in flux. One of the largest scooter rideshare programs, a Chinese company, just laid off about 75 or 80% of its workforce Thursday of last week. Let's jump over to trade wars. Jamie Dimon was making some noise, I think it was this morning on CNN, talking about, while he congratulated the president on rattling some sabers with China, thinks that China's out of control relative to the theft of intellectual properties. He was condemning the Trump administration and specifically Trump advisors on the failure to make revisions to NAFTA and develop a North Atlantic strategy. Dimon said we'd be much more effective in changing China's behavior if we spoke to them in a singular North American voice. What's your take on what's going on with the administration on international trade?
Well, like you said, oftentimes this president identifies an issue, and then he blusters and over-exaggerates, and then that's supposed to be negotiating strategy, international relations, international trade. He's way off base because it's a lot different than dealing with some real estate developers in New York City and blustering what you can do on 6th Avenue as opposed to this. So yes, he was right to raise the issue about China and intellectual property. His trade policies are a disaster. His trade policies are going to reduce the benefit of the Tax Cut and Jobs Act by about 33% for business. The best way to have an effective trade policy is through alliances. The fact that he did not get involved in the TPP probably would have been one of the more effective ways to deal with China, though he should have hit him pretty hard on this intellectual property, theft, and I think he blusters about it. He ends up hurting soy
farmers in the Midwest, in Iowa.
In the Midwest. So same thing, with NAFTA. NAFTA was 20 years old. It was time to renegotiate and modernize NAFTA. It was time to work with the EU differently. But this president is isolating America, and I never thought in my time I would see a situation where American leadership was becoming obsolete, where America as a country was just being thrown to the sideline. And this president thinks it's cute to do that. He likes to bluster. He identifies a problem, which we would all agree with, and then he exerts zero leadership in effectively implementing that program. TPP, what he's doing with China on intellectual property theft is not going to get anything done. It's just going to get their back up and have more tariff problems. EU developing its own trade agreements with Japan and isolating us. I can go on and cite.
Forget the ideology. It reminds me of the Carter administration, in which the foreign policy was so inept. We boycotted the Olympics, which did nothing. We isolated ourselves in an attempt to draw fine lines. We couldn't recover our hostages from Iran. It was a host of things.
Well, Jimmy Carter showed weakness. That's why Ronald Reagan became president in
right.
part. But at the same time, with Carter, even though some of the execution left something to be questioned, He had a first-class national security advisor, Zygmunt Brzezinski. We understood what the Cold War was about. We were philosophically, consistent, weaker than we should have been. Some of the democratic politics of the time of not wanting to insult the Soviets till Reagan told them to tear down the wall.
Yeah.
And that doesn't compare to this. America was not isolating itself. America didn't conduct the Iranian problem as swiftly as it should. We didn't react to the fall of Russia as quickly as we could have. I could point a lot of problems, but there was not intellectual dishonesty. There was not a lack of a consistent philosophy. And I would submit one thing. Jimmy Carter did a hell of a job, better than most other presidents we had, on the Israeli-Palestine issue. He had Menachem Begin and
Anwar Sadat.
Anwar Sadat. Of course, Anwar Sadat's life.
Yeah.
But that was leadership. And so in any administration's foreign policy, you could find high and low spots. The Israeli, Palestinian, Egypt,
Camp David Accord,
Camp David Accords
was a win.
Was a real accomplishment. You point to one accomplishment of this administration, and I'll buy you a coat.
Let's jump over to the governor's race in our last couple of minutes. It is zigging and zagging all the time. We wrote a story last week about a fight between the Raimondo and Brown camps over who's taking money from who on the energy side. The Providence Journal then duplicated the story later on in the week.
Well, imitation's the best form.
It is, absolutely. The governor also refuses. Dan McKee immediately offered to donate money he had received from the Sackler family, from Purdue Pharma to treatment facilities in Rhode Island. The governor refuses to donate any money from the Sacklers. This weekend up at Harvard, there was a major demonstration by medical students at Harvard complaining about Harvard taking money from the Sacklers. That's bubbling up across the country. Art museums, universities, a real pushback against the opioid industry. What's going on in this governor's race?
Well, let's take the primaries first, because until after September 12th, there's not a governor's race. I find it the height of hypocrisy for this governor to criticize the fundraising, conduct of her opponent. I mean, she's on the road to Beverly Hills, to San Francisco, to Wall Street. Your story had a paper, prepared a story, recently about the hedge fund contribution, which was treasurer, and putting $1 billion into hedge funds. And so if you're going to criticize your opponent, and maybe the criticism was justified, maybe it wasn't justified. My politics is certainly different from Mr. Brown's. But if you're going to criticize your opponent, make sure you don't live in a glass house. And one of the big political liabilities of this governor, and one of the reasons I think her popularity is in the low 40s, is that she's viewed as an elitist. And she's viewed as an elitist as she raises money. And something I can't explain, why the raising of money and keeping every dollar you get is that important. She certainly has enough money to run a successful campaign, and relative to whoever her opponent is, she's going to be extremely well, funded. So I can't explain that. When she criticizes Dave Brown on his fundraising, Matt Brown, I'm sorry, it's similar to the pot calling the kettle black. That's what that is. I can't explain
it. It is also a little strange. I mean, Matt Brown's campaign donations that she's questioning took place between 2000 and 2006. We're talking about, relative to some of her donations, checks that have just come in the door in some of these cases. She had a fundraiser scheduled in New York by one of the CEOs who was denied, tobacco CEOs who denied that there was any linkage between tobacco smoking and cancer, or that nicotine was addictive. That's what they testified, which sparked a whole Justice Department investigation of whether or not they lied to Congress. I mean, this was just a few weeks ago that she was going to have that New York fundraiser. It ultimately got canceled because of other state business, but I think some reporting on it by GoLocal might have had a little bit of an impact on it. I mean, just give the checks back. It just seems silly. You know, the governor talks about, I think, a lot of things that people are attracted to. Let's talk about one last little.
Let me ask you one question about
Sure.
that. This political question. So, why is the governor attacking, trying to find things to attack Matt Brown on? Because Matt Brown has come lately to the campaign. The governor's fundraising.
I can tell you this. Governor Raimondo's campaign is the only campaign that is doing tracking polls on a steady basis. If the incumbent governor with $4.3 million is attacking the upstart, late entry Matt Brown, they're worried, based on their tracking polling, that Matt Brown is a real threat. You would just ignore him. I mean, you wouldn't bring up his name. You don't hear Alan Fung talking about Giovanni Ferrosi. I don't think he's uttered his name in the last year. If the person's not a threat, why would you ever talk about him? I think there's very deep concerns.
And that's the question I have.
Yeah,
and she can't find any. So this is the issue she can find. So
yeah.
she raises it.
The X factor in all of this is Aaron Ruggenberg has spent a better part of 2 years IDing voters, progressive voters, to go out and vote in this Democratic primary. He has a tough primary against incumbent Democrat Dan McKee. He knows where every single vote is. And they are going to get out progressive voters. And Matt Brown could benefit from those progressive voters who are getting more and more frustrated with mainline Democrats about not being active enough, not being progressive enough, not taking a hard enough stance and allowing people like Donald Trump to be in control of the country, etc.
Well, the Democrat Party is a crossroads. There was an excellent piece in last week's issue of The Economist.
Yeah, absolutely.
About the future of the Democrat Party. And the fight is between and for lack of better description, I'll call them pragmatic incrementalists. People who want Obamacare or improve Obamacare, they want to make, changes that the liberal base, would support. Versus what I'd call the fundamentalists, named somewhat after the Ayatollah, who want to make, fundamental,
Spoken like a true Republican.
Well, spoken like a true American, but who want to make, fundamental changes in the system. And that is the conflict. Now, in a primary, you try to, play to your base, but I think you're going to see that most Democrats kind of pivot, back to the middle and recognize that they can't please every constituent group that's part of the party. They have to say...
I think there may be a pivot back. I don't think it's going to happen in 2018. I think you're going to see a pivot back for the presidential election in 20. But I think right now you've got a fired up progressive base. They're putting up some wins. They feel empowered. They're able to raise money. They're much better organized than anybody else on the playing field. And they've got some iconic leaders that they rally around.
Oh, I agree. I think they raise money. They're organized. They're doing a better job, with the technology of identifying and getting out their vote. Mobilize.com, et cetera.
Absolutely.
I think you're going to see the impact of that in local races. I think you're going to see the impact in legislative races. Lieutenant governor is hard to predict. Because Dan McKee has been around a while.
Yep.
He's getting out. He's doing things that are popular to the mainstream. And like anything else, it's going to depend on who takes the trouble to come out and vote in a primary in the second week in September. And that's where the progressives have a real advantage because they're motivated.
Last question. Governor Raimondo announced today that in her second term, if she is reelected, she will take her free college education now implemented at the community college level and extend it to four-year colleges, Rhode Island College and URI, for the last 2 years of the four-year period. Good policy, bad policy?
Well, when you ask the question, is it good to make education, higher education, is available? Of course, it's good policy to make higher education available, but the devil is in the details. And I think she ought to spend her time focusing on two things before we have universal health, free colleges, porridge coming down and just filling up your cup with it, for free.
Maybe K through 12?
Yeah, fix up K through 12. But not only that, fix up the 2-year program at the community college. One of the biggest gripes about the community college program once you get past the policy in place to provide free education, is the quality of that program, how quickly kids are getting out, what kind of remunerative programs they have to take, and those, and I think I would deal with that and clean that up first instead of making that statement. The other thing I would do is, the other statement I would make is get the state's financial house in order.
Yeah.
You know, we're moving towards a $227 million structural deficit by 2023. Per capita spending in Rhode Island compared to all other New England states is higher. You know, Massachusetts spends on capita about $8,900 per person. We spend about $9,200 per person. We do the same things. Why?
Right.
Vermont was a small state and also a very liberal state, spends $8,900 per capita. We spend $9,200. Again, we have the same philosophy, the same politics, the same ideology. So I think I'd fix up those problems first. I'd get the state in a position where you could do more to make education, you know, more accessible. But you do have to do it from a firm foundation. And that's the criticism, that's more and more the criticism you're going to hear about our economic development programs, is that they're boutique programs, but we're not fixing up the structure.
The money man always knows it, covers it all, from trade to Providence to you name it, he's got it.
Never in doubt.
Never in doubt. Money man, thank you so much, as always, for joining us on Business Monday here at the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. We're going to be right back with Saul Kaplan from Business Innovation Factory. Hold on, innovation coming right at you. We'll be right back. We are back. It's Business Monday. We're talking innovation. Saul Kaplan is here. He was innovating Maine, I think it was, this past weekend, or eating lobsters. Were there lobsters involved?
There were lobsters.
How many lobsters did you consume over the course of the weekend?
I think we ate several amongst us. I think the price has been holding up this year.
I thought it was dropped because of the tariffs and not so many going to Asia. That was what I read in some poo-poo publication like the New York Times or something like that. Lots to talk about. Twin River.
Twin River.
Twin River. I think when you were head of economic development, it was a bankrupt Lincoln Greyhound racetrack. Was that about what it was?
I was thinking when I heard the story of the deal that they just announced. I was thinking back to the Lincoln Greyhound
Yeah.
Park, right?
There were
which,
indictments,
Rhode
it was-
Islanders all knew,
yeah.
Exactly where the Greyhound Park used to be.
Yeah, that's right.
And oh my goodness, how far have they come now to execute this deal? You probably understand it better than me. I read just the press coverage, so I haven't seen any of the documents.
Yeah.
I mean, this is not your average financial deal.
No, sir.
And on the surface, lots of questions, but on the surface, I mean, good for them. I mean, we like when Rhode Island entities
Right.
expand.
Absolutely.
And then as the old economic development guy in me wants to know, like, where are the headquarters jobs going to be?
They're coming here.
Are they going to be
Yep,
here?
John Taylor confirmed last night
Yeah.
via message at about 10 or 11 o'clock. Headquarters is here. They're going public. I think that's, we don't have a lot of public companies
Going
on the.
public without an IPO, that's pretty
Yeah,
smart.
that's right. They're
Yeah.
leveraging, I think it's one of those, the other Dover's public. So they're
Yeah.
going to leverage that
You
and
buy
switch
it,
that
I
around.
mean, here, it's a merger technically.
Right.
Yeah, but they're basically,
The acquirer.
They're buying a company that is going to be what, like a little over 7% of the total company.
Right.
Right. So it's so here they acquire that, and they don't have to go through all the formal going public because they acquire a company that is public.
Correct.
And then all of a sudden they can change the name, issue the stock. Well, it remains to be seen. It's a private company, Twin River, that'll make it
Absolutely.
public.
Right.
So whenever that happens, I like to know, just because I'm curious this way.
Who owns what?
Yeah, who owns? Who are the private owners?
Yeah.
Right. And are they cashing out?
Yeah.
Or are they just converting into stock? I imagine it's a little bit of both.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's some people taking some money, some chips. Let's use the
Yeah, right.
some chips off the table.
Right.
Right. And then they also, I saw in the coverage that they were going to do, they were going to offer more stock.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. And so again, what's the use of that capital? What are they going to do with it? Is it to buy out the owners, or is it to reinvest in growth? And how much of that growth happens outside of Rhode Island that creates some headquarters jobs here?
So
Right?
listen, I think we're going to see some details coming out. I assume that it's partially to pay off the Dover folks. I think it's partially to go out and buy some more stuff. I mean, that's generally the strategy isn't to stay the same. And
that's right.
listen, I've known John Taylor back to when he was functionally maybe the most junior staffer to then Governor Ed Dupree.
Yeah, that's right.
Picking up laundry for the governor, and he's just been slow and steady, building. And Gary, before you said, listen, he was pretty much always good for his word, and they've just kept going after these things one at a time, building things. And maybe the most untold story of trying to locate a place like Newport Grand in Tiverton. I don't know what the final count was, but I know that he probably did upwards of 100 meetings with people around kitchen tables and in living rooms, talking to folks who lived in Tiverton. And it only passed by, I think, 100 votes or something like that. It was a tiny little margin. And it was all on the back of him going out and talking to people, asking them what they needed and what they wanted, and here were the benefits, and hopefully that they would trust him. And, I think he's been good for that.
Well,
So-
their timing, has been good. They went through the big heavy slog to get the original,
Absolutely.
kind of Lincoln-based thing done. This more recent edition, I mean, the economy's bad. The state's been kind of desperate, for
Yep.
cash flow, so they kind of put it through. In an innovation discussion, of course, we have to talk about the disruption of this whole industry. Because look how quickly we've gone from, the monopoly, we're only Las Vegas, and
Yeah,
only
right.
Las Vegas and Atlantic City, and then whatever state could muster the legislative will to put it into now where every corner. And so now the question becomes not just can you build physical structures that people go to,
Right.
but it's all the online piece. Right?
Absolutely.
And what are the regulations that are going to exist around that? And in the end, I think you're going to see a slowdown in building casinos, right? And you're going to see an increase in these online platforms. And once you get beyond just the business issue here, then I look at it from the standpoint of what are the nature of the jobs that this produces here in our local economy. What is the impact of people who use these things heavily You know, and how do you deal with that as a community? I don't like when the state becomes more dependent
Right.
on it. You know, and to the point where it is now, you'd have to say we are dependent on that.
100%. We would
Right.
completely change state government,
Which isn't good.
which is not necessarily good. And I think you lay up the key element of all this, which is this is an industry inches away from huge technology upheaval. You saw it a little bit with
That's right.
DraftKings and some of the others.
That's
Now
right.
that's going to break loose with this Las Vegas style sports betting. The pie in New England isn't getting any bigger, but there's more players. MGM opening up in Springfield. You've got a Wynn facility or whatever it's going to be rebranded as up in the Boston area. You've got Tiverton opening up. You've still got the Connecticut casinos.
Right.
The number of players are not increasing, nor is what they spent.
The thing we have to watch really carefully is when it's just Rhode Island based, they have a shared interest in this cash flow that supports
Absolutely.
our state government.
Mhm.
The minute they go national,
Yeah.
and they have a whole portfolio where they mitigate their risk, right? Then our local interests
That's right.
aren't as well protected, right? Because they can offset competitive challenges here in Rhode Island, you know, with other installations or online things that they do outside of the state.
Absolutely.
And so we have to pay attention to our interests here in Rhode Island to make sure that that revenue stream, you know, that we can mitigate it, create other revenue streams, you know, or protect it. So we can't
Well, we
assume
saw-
that they're aligned. We can't assume that the
Absolutely.
interests are
And we
aligned
saw
to
when
use it takes-
IGT, GTech got purchased by the Italian company, then ultimately got rebranded as IGT. The number of jobs actually taking place in Rhode Island has shrunk to a tiny fraction of what it used to be. And
Well, they delivered on their promise when we did the deal, you know, that put their headquarters here, you know, back in the GTech days.
Yeah.
They have lived up to their obligations.
well, they missed last
and,
year,
you know,
and they got punished
they've-
accordingly.
But they've stayed on it.
Yeah.
And, you know, they didn't wholesale try to get out
Yeah.
of those obligations. But you're absolutely right. You know, now this is a global organization. A lot of the interest has started to shift, so we have to pay attention to that too, and our local interests. But it's the same in every story. We know that when industry is contained here in Rhode Island, like the good old days.
Yeah,
right,
absolutely.
you know, we had more of those jobs, and people had more of a community interest. And as these things nationalize and globalize,
That's why we like the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center, less
go.
so than the Bank of America Broadcast Center. Let me tell you
there
that
you go.
much.
Well, we have to be vigilant, and we should be proactive, because you don't want to wake up one day relying on a big
Empty, Superman building like that.
And then you have an empty, you know, industry, an empty company, you know, that kind of lives. So I'm sure folks are paying attention to that from, you know, through the Rhode Island lens. But putting that all aside, you know, good for the local team.
Yep.
You know, on getting bigger, diversifying, and I hope that does create economic impact here in Rhode Island, not just by increasing the footprint, you know, of gambling locations here, but by supporting a national network that creates some jobs here, because those are good jobs, those headquarter jobs.
Hasn't been this
are really
good
nice.
since Raymond Patriarch owned a piece of the sands in Vegas, right? I think he owned a piece in Cuba too, as well.
We had the regional headquarters.
That's right.
In Rhode
Almost the
Island.
national headquarters. We were right there vying for the national
We
headquarters.
had the headquarters jobs here.
My favorite was that Raymond Sr., Frank Sinatra, and Dean Martin owned a racetrack in Western Mass. That was a good one as
The
well.
thing that is always amazing to me, because I'm not from Rhode Island, although I've been here a long time, and as you listen to Crime Town and you learn the history of this thing, literally it is true, we were the regional headquarters.
Yeah,
for sure.
yeah.
And it came with headquarters jobs.
Yeah, that's right.
which we can debate whether that was positive or negative for the economy, but it lasted a long time.
Let's see. On Friday, 3 communities in New England realized bird scooters. We just saw one zip by.
I thought I saw him coming in
Yeah,
here today.
one came by. It was Somerville, Cambridge, and Providence.
Yep.
Did not hit Boston.
Yep.
They are
Okay.
little scooters. You swipe with an app. It costs $1 to engage, and then 15 cents a mile.
Okay.
A minute, excuse me, 15 cents a minute. Unregulated.
Unregulated, untethered, right?
Untethered.
Do you leave it wherever?
Wherever you want.
You leave it wherever it is, and then somebody goes and retrieves it,
Yeah.
recharges it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And Mayor of Boston, Marty Walsh, said on late Friday, he said if they bring them into this city, we'll dump them off at the tow yard, and we'll collect them and dump them. So they're getting a mixed reactions in cities and towns. A little strange. I mean, I like the guerrilla marketing part of it, but they do go 15 miles an hour. There's not a lot of regulation to them. Are we hitting the outer banks of scooter sharing?
I think you're going to have, I don't think we're hitting the outer banks. I think we're just getting started.
Yeah.
I think there's one right over there, actually.
Yeah.
So I think we're seeing companies and new business models that are springing up, based on what customers want, right? And what these millennials want are lots and lots of different transportation options. They want to jump on motorized bikes, on scooters, on hoverboards, if that's
Yeah, absolutely.
like whatever it is, and they want pedestrian-friendly living with easy transportation back and forth. And that bumps square into traditional industrial era transportation systems, right? And some of them are going to get disrupted. Some of us are going to get disrupted when we see these different forms of transportation. And as usual, the regulators are going to be behind.
Right,
This stuff
absolutely.
is all going to start happening. And then all of a sudden, regulators are going to wake up, or lobbyists are going to try to wake them up. To say, for the big song and dance around how, this isn't fair, this isn't right. In the meantime, customers enjoy getting from A to B in an inexpensive and convenient way, and you have to think through what's the right regulatory framework, not because some existing system got disrupted, but because there are real safety risks around having unlimited forms of transportation, all trying to use the same sidewalks and infrastructure, and you're going to find that there are going to be accidents, right? So I'm for the right balanced regulation, but it can't be knee-jerk regulation just to stop innovation and to stop new forms of mobility. But you're just beginning to see these new forms of mobility, and young people, millennials, love those things. That thing just happened, and already just driving over here today,
Right.
I think I saw 4 or 5 of them.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you have to wonder, okay, what's their right of way? What part of the road do they use or not use?
We have a piece going up tomorrow. 3 of the rules are you're not supposed to ride on sidewalks.
Okay.
You're supposed to be 18 years old or older, and you're supposed to be wearing a helmet. And we have some photos of a young teen
Right.
on a sidewalk whipping along without a helmet.
Yeah, so they'll need to call back the legislature. Like, we'll have to have a special session, just to deal, with quick and
Well,
hurry regulation.
it will happen if some 14-year-old implants himself and
That'll speed it up. I'm good with the puns today, aren't I?
yeah, that's right. Feel like the beginning of Law and Order. Jerry Orbach
That's pretty funny.
talking about it.
But what I worry about is that what will happen is there'll be regulatory overreach, right?
Yeah.
Because everyone will come jumping in, talking about why.
But you just saw an instance in Missouri. Everything seems to be happening in Missouri, in which an Uber Lyft driver was real-time streaming his passengers via a third party on a pay-for-play, monetizing it, and no state law regulated it.
Right.
But his driver's agreement with Lyft and Uber were both violated, and he has subsequently been fired.
Yep.
There's for every action
you
there's
can never anticipate everything that you might need some rule for.
Right.
And so what happens is, particularly in these days, in the 21st century, right, there's a lot of folks that are trying more stuff. That's a good thing.
Yep.
Now what happens is somebody does something, and all of a sudden we wake up and say, well, wait a minute, there's no rule against live streaming. In fact, the rules actually allow for it.
One-party consent.
Right.
Same in Rhode Island.
Right, and so all of a sudden, then somebody says, wait a minute, what about
Here comes one.
What about my right to privacy, right? Does
No
somebody
helmet
driving
on the sidewalk.
Does somebody driving an Uber like actually have a right to film, and live stream,
Right.
what we're doing, and that's what's happening, right? They pull into my driveway, now people see where I live, and all the stuff, right? And so now you end up with who's gonna set the rules? What's the process for setting rules that reflects the balanced needs of the community?
Right.
Right? And how much confidence do we have in our legislative bodies to set reasonable, rules that keep our, community and society moving forward? I don't know how you feel about it. I'm a little leery, of, the rules get set by the loudest lobbyist, that's up there, spinning a story. We've got serious, challenges that we've got to address. We've got a lot of innovation and a lot of new technology, and we're going to have to be able to set rules. They're going to move over time, right? Because one set of rules today, out of date, tomorrow. We gotta
Or
get
by noon today.
much better at how we govern technology and how we balance the interests of us as individuals, and the community as a whole, and we could get a whole lot better at understanding the individual interests of this.
Bird scooters I saw uttered was, I can't remember if it's a tweet or a comment in here at GoLocal, seems to be a personal injury attorney's dream. Will litigation become the regulating factor?
Well, I think litigation always plays a factor in this. I think it's always a system, right? So
Right.
it's always what rules are in place, right? What's the legal environment, in the litigation, environment, and who's going to challenge, what part of it? I think this is going to continue to play out with all these new technologies. I don't think there's anything unique about this one.
You talk about millennials and their
Yep.
different behavior in transportation, obviously living in cities, working in cities, all those things. Are we missing the impending doom, and I mean doom to our economy, for the auto industry? Is anybody, we almost had the auto industry go down in 07, 08. The federal government stepped in and lent hundreds of billions of dollars to the auto industry to keep it afloat. Should we be mindful of that as an economy? That one of the biggest sectors of our economy may not even be prepared for what may switch over in a relatively quick period of time.
Well, it already is. You could see the large auto. If you think of yourself as being in the auto industry, right, you're going to lose.
Yeah.
Right. You have got to be in the transportation and mobility business, right? And you have to find models and systems and business models that get people from A to B. If you think you're in the auto industry, right,
But I don't see
what's
it.
happening.
But I don't see it. I don't see Chris Hurd talking about anything other than Chevrolets. He's not talking about the new scooter or the new this or the new that.
They do talk about it, but in the mainstream of the conversation we should be having is about autonomous vehicles, right? That's the big technology play, right? Where all the big
Driverless cars.
right? Driverless cars, and where the tech companies out in Silicon Valley, are developing the software and the tools, and the auto industry had been slow to react, not anymore.
Yeah.
Right? They're not going to cede the space to the tech companies, and they're aggressively, right, doing their exploration, R&D, product concepts, in this space. So I think they're not going to cede the transportation business, right, and let the auto industry, go the way of the dinosaur. They're going to do everything in their power to reinvent themselves. The question is it too little, too late, right? Or are the tech companies going to own, the most important part of this capability set? I think the notion of different forms of transportation and different models, right? You can watch what Uber's doing. They don't view themselves as solely in the ride-sharing business. They have a relationship with one of those scooter companies.
Absolutely, they've invested in one.
They are
Or
aggressively doing exactly what Bird is doing here in Rhode Island, and they've got more locations than this company has. So it's going to be a fight to go through the same regulatory game that they did with ride sharing, and they continue to go through with ride sharing.
well, we see the consolidation. Chinese company, I think it's called OHO, which was in dozens of cities, just announced Thursday that they were laying off 70% of their U.S. workforce in their scooter play. It was a bike sharing model more than a scooter sharing model. Will we see ultimately a shakeout like we saw in kind of the deal space, where now it seems like Groupon's the only one barely surviving, and now they've said that they're going to sell out as well. Will we just see, model after model, venture, private equity, and then at the end of the day, one wins or two wins?
Well, I think we're in an era. First of all, yes, we're going to see the proliferation of lots of new models.
Yeah.
Right. Different consumer groups, and models to fit that consumer group.
Yeah.
I think this notion of one winner takes all, I think is industrial era thinking. I think we're going to be in this churn for a long time. I think new technologies are going to come, new models are going to be possible, right? And different consumers want models that fit their needs. They don't want to fit into a model that doesn't. And so I think this idea that there's one winner in every traditional industry, I think we're in this era of constant churn, new models, new ways to meet customer needs, and what we need are the other parts of these systems, including the regulatory, and legal piece, right, to start to figure out how we're going to deal with that, because it's not going to change. I don't think this is going to slow down. I don't think we're just in a temporary, thing, and then we can go back to business as usual. I think we're going to be in business of constant new technologies, opening up new capabilities, opening up new ways to solve customer challenges, and new models are going to emerge to do that. The regulatory schemes that lasted for 30 years are history. Right?
So it seems like the EU is ahead of us in being able to slap back misbehaving technology companies for violating privacy rules, and with meaningful penalties. I think it was Google last week, 5 or 6 billion. 5 billion.
Right.
Even if you're Google, 5 billion's got to hurt a little bit.
I don't know.
Maybe not.
What kind of data we live in now, where a $5 billion fine, which, by the way, isn't the worst part of it, because they'll appeal that.
Right.
Right. It's the rules that are going to go in place that they're going to have to conform with that change how they deliver service.
And they'll write off the $5 billion penalty.
Even Google, even if the penalty stays at $5 billion. Right. We live in a world now where you would think that was real money, to Google, that's a speed bump. Right, which is amazing to say. Imagine saying that $5 billion is a speed bump.
That's the way it is here around GoLocal.
Right.
Yeah,
I mean, but to your point about, is Europe out ahead on some of these issues? I think they've been further ahead at some of these new models, responding more, particularly in the big urban centers across Europe. A lot of these it used to be we owned all the technology and all the technology startups, here in America. But not true anymore. I mean, you can travel around the world and see spots for this, where these new technologies emerge, where particularly the new business models, the ways to do this, the way consumers want to, they want to go from having to own the asset to be able to have access to the asset.
Right.
They want to go from, this is the only way I get from A to B, and somebody regulates that, decides for me how to get there, to having access to lots of different choices about how to get from A to B. And you're starting to see that. A bicycle, a scooter, a motorized bicycle, you're going to keep seeing these things, and they're going to keep coming. And we are so far behind in our ability to have good community conversations about the implications, in order to make sure we've got the right level of regulation to allow these new models.
Well, listen, how do you, right? On Thursday, there was no bird scooter. On Friday, there was a bird scooter.
And they're out of session. So now
right.
And so by the time they come back into session, and then
But the city, the city's not capable, right? The city can't get, it could be a nuisance, it's a violation, you can't have any kind of motorized thing on a sidewalk. They could be enforcing it. They're just not capable of it.
Oh, that's right.
Let's just go to Uber for 1 second. Latest reports is 10 more senior executive blown out already this year. Some of these jobs, and I'm talking senior C-suite positions, have turned 3-4 times in 3 years. I get innovation and I get building the right team, but at some point, that's got to speak to, there's 2 CEOs, an interim CEO, you know, directors of marketing in and out, like, you know,
Yeah.
what does all this mean? And are we now at a little bit of a worry stage?
Yep.
Yes, there's revenue, and yes, there's this, but it's not a profitable company. Something does not seem right.
Well, I think this is culture doesn't change that quickly. You can change the CEO, but in order to create the kind of culture, the behaviors in the organization, you know, that you're looking for when you're that size and you're growing that fast, right? I think you still have a lot of the remnants of what preceded this new CEO.
Yeah.
He is working it. There's going to be a lot of turnover, you know, in management ranks for a while.
Yeah.
Until he gets the team, you know, that understands that he means it when he says we're going to change the culture.
Yeah.
I don't think those commercials, you know, are just puff.
Yeah.
He knows he needs to change the culture. They have a winning model, but the culture needs to change, and he'll have to accept the trade-offs in the model and growth that come along with that. They did win the charm offensive back in London, you noticed, where they got booted out, and now the new CEO is personally focused, and they put on the charm offensive, and it worked, and now they're back in London. Right. So
In Dublin, they're not.
Right.
You
They're
use
still
your Uber app, you get a taxi.
Yeah, he's still not.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, there's still pushback, but they're still growing. I believe the new CEO is focused on the right thing, but it's hard, and you're going to still see turnover, you know, in terms of leadership, because there's going to be a lot of sensitivity to the environment. I saw the HR exec just left. You know, a lot of people are complaining about the work conditions, and some of that is a remnant of what preceded the new CEO, but it's real, and you've got to pay attention to it, and I think the new CEO is going to continue to stay focused and work on this.
Great. Last but not least, maybe most importantly, the opportunity for Americans, Rhode Islanders, to change their lives. Biff,
Yes, there you go.
18.
Yeah.
What do we have coming
Yeah.
this September,
Yeah.
right after the primaries,
I know.
13th and 14th
That
of
same
September?
week.
It could not be a busier week at GoLocal land.
Yes, that's the so September 13th and
Electoral
14th.
chaos, innovation galore.
Well, it's so inspiring right now for our team and for me. I love this time because every year at this time, I talk personally with every single of the storytellers or speakers. You know, we have 32 of them, and I talk with each of them, not to prescribe what their story is, but to just check in. I really want them to understand what they got themselves into, you know, which is a stage where you're expected to be genuine, you're expected to share a personal story about transformation, and I want to make sure that they understand it. So I'm right in the midst of these calls. I mean, you want to talk about 32 of the most interesting, inspiring calls I have all year round. It's really great fun. I always share a storyteller
Please.
with you here.
We're waiting.
Yes, yes. So
It wasn't Larry the Lobster up in Maine this week who gave his life to Biff and the Kaplan family.
Although he did go to a microbrewery up there that was pretty cool that we thought might be a candidate for a minute. I thought Emily,
After the seventh drink.
Emily Levy is a recent Rhode Islander. I always like to have some local innovators there, and I always like to have youth. She's out of Babson 2 years, went to, learned entrepreneurship there, and learned it in a way that Babson teaches, which is about experience and
Right.
personally do it. So here's a story of someone who, we can relate to this here in New England. Got Lyme disease. It took a long time for her diagnosis to be made. She had a very, very serious, kind of Lyme disease journey. And it got so serious that she had to have a PICC line because
Oh
she
my.
needed infusion. So pretty
Yeah.
serious stuff. And I can talk about it because she tells the story personally about having this PICC line in her arm and having the clothing and that went around it and kind of the band that went around it, like paying no attention to design and making it feel good. So literally in college, started a business called Mighty Well. Right, and next thing you know, she is producing and sourcing and selling as a college student, right, all over the country and now expanding her line.
Very similar to my experience. My senior year at URI, I learned how to tie my shoes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a
she's-
big,
and
big.
here's someone actually
right.
starting and scaling a business. Here in Rhode Island, you're going to hear about her, certainly at the summit, but you're going to hear about her beyond that. She's an amazing, inspiring youth, starting something real that meets a personal need that a lot of people challenge for. And Emily Reed is going to share that story
Great.
on the stage at BIF 2018. So we're really excited about that.
Excellent. Well, Saul, as always, thank you so much. A great journey around the world and Providence. Be careful when you leave the
I'm gonna
building.
take a scooter home
There
with me,
is bird scooters that could run your
take a scooter
buttocks over at every turn. They are unregulated. If you block their motion, they'll probably sue you because they won't be wearing helmets. So to the victor goes the spoils. We won't see you next week, but we'll see you the week after. Is that right? Or we see you next week. Thanks so much for coming on. Thanks everybody for tuning in to Business Monday. It was a wild and woolly day, and we will be back tomorrow afternoon, I believe at 3 o'clock with Rachel Nunes, who's got lots of news and lots of interesting things going on. And then I think we've got Kate Nagel right afterwards. Thanks everybody for tuning in at the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. I'm Josh Fenton. He's Saul Kaplan. We'll see you tomorrow.